Okay, here's the next video. This is the trigger mechanism that I use. It's a Neptonics reef trigger mechanism. Just some pointers that I figured out on my own setting them is what you want to do is definitely get the jig that they sell. It's well worth the money instead of trying to guess where what this does is it sets, once you get your gun notched out for the trigger mechanism to go in, this jig guides you exactly where the securing pins go, and it works perfect. And it also has the guide for putting the line release in and the line release slot. I mean, this thing, that's a perfect match. I mean, it works. Believe me, it works. By all means, get the jig. It doesn't cost very much. But what you want to do, and they're all different, is when I get the trigger mechanism, I usually set the trigger as if you had a spear in it, and then set it on your gun, and find out where the release is at. And the reason you do that is so you'll know where to set this trigger front to rear, and to where when you pull the trigger back, it doesn't hit the back side of your gun. That way you don't have to keep digging out. But if you just set the trigger here, and I've already done this one, but I'm just going to show you the way I do it, is if you hold it tight and pull the trigger back, as soon as it releases, you can hold it there and then bring the trigger mechanism back to where it's just barely up against the back of the trigger housing here, to where it doesn't hit it, but you don't run out of room before the spear releases. And then just mark on your gun, as I've already done, just mark on your gun real close, a front and a rear mark, and then that's where your trigger will set, because you want it set as far back as you possibly can get it. That way you get plenty of band stretch. When this is all put together, the farther the trigger's back, the more band stretch you get. That's the reason they have reverse trigger mechanisms. But I don't, not that I don't like the reverse trigger mechanisms, I just don't use them. So if you get it where you can set it all the way back, get plenty of band stretch out of it. Once you get your, they give you the dimensions on their website as far as the size of the trigger mechanism. I usually set it when I router out for the trigger mechanism. This trigger mechanism is actually 1 inch deep, 1/2 inch thick, and 2.75 long. I usually router out the maximum depth, 1 inch depth, and that seems, when you set it at that depth with the jig that they give you, that sets the trigger mechanism flat on the top of the gun. And in my opinion, it's set up this way for an enclosed track, or what I'm going to call a semi-enclosed track. So what you want to be careful with is, depending on what kind of gun you're building, if you're doing a enclosed track or a semi-enclosed track, and I'll explain it to you later what I'm talking about there, you'll set it as the jig is set up right here. If you're not doing an enclosed track, what you want to do, if you're doing what I call a top slide, if your spear is sitting on the top in just a small concave, then what you'll want to do is already have your groove cut for your spear to go in, how you want it, and then install the spear that you're going to use, and then set, if I'm not getting too far ahead of you, hoping I'm explaining this where you understand. But if you're already cut out for the trigger mechanisms, the trigger mechanism slot is already cut out, 1 inch deep, 1/2 inch wide, 2.78. It's all ready to set in, if you think of it that way. And you already have your slide cut out for your spear to go in, whether you're using the poly slide, and I'll show you I am going to use poly slide. I use them on all of mine. And what you want to do is the spear that you're going to use, go ahead and put the spear in, and then set everything down into the gun to where the spear is setting in its channel, in the groove. And you might wind up, when your spear is setting in the groove even and straight, you might wind up that the trigger mechanism is actually above the top of the gun, and that's fine. But what you want to do is, as it's here, hold the spear in tight against its track, and then you want to measure the height that the trigger mechanism is out of the gun, you know, because on a top slide it's going to be somewhat out of the gun. It won't be flush with the gun like an enclosed or semi-enclosed track. It'll be out of the gun somewhat. So take a, you know, good steel rule. Don't use a tape measure. Take a good steel rule and measure how far it's sticking out of the gun, and then that gives you to where you'll know when you come in with your jig, then you'll measure it the exact same way. You'll measure the space, just say the space the trigger mechanism was out of the top of the gun, 1/4 of an inch. Then you'll want 1/4 of an inch space between the top of the gun and the bottom of your jig before you drill your guide pin holes. So if you hopefully you understand what I'm saying. And if not, if I'm way ahead of you on any of this stuff, please feel free to you know, send me a message. I'll answer it. You know, the best of my knowledge, I'll answer it. And and another thing that's good about these triggers is they do come with what I feel is a super long trigger, but once you get set in here, these things are simple to recontour. If you don't like this somewhat straight trigger, you can put a nice curve in them. You can trim them off if you need to. They're not set in stone. You know, if you find out that, you know, once you get it set in here that the trigger is rubbing your guard at the bottom here, you can trim these off and contour them. You can and I have done it myself. They're easy to do. You can put a nice curve into them and you know, build them the way you want to. So they're super easy to install. And like I say, Neptunic sells these. It's the reef mechanism. They're cheap. Get the jig with it. It definitely, you know, it's worth the money, I promise you. And what I'm going to do, and you can, they give you an instructions on their website. You can print out the instructions. I did. I've done a lot of them now to where, you know, it's pretty simple. This is going to be my spear guide. This is what my spear is going to ride on. It's poly. What I do is I don't let it ride on the wood. I install this, and I'll show you, you know, as I go along, I'll show you how I do it. It's 3/4 inches wide, 1/2 inch deep for this shallow water gun. And what I do is, because once I groove this out, dado this out for this slide, I epoxy it in. And just what you see on the side here, I take a Dremel and grind what I call T's in it, all the way down the whole length of it on both sides. And I just barely contour the bottom of it that's going to go into the gun. I just barely contour it just a little bit, so it's easier. It's such a tight fit, it's easier to get started down in the gun to tap it down there. The reason for the T's are the epoxy. Once you set this in epoxy, the epoxy actually goes up in these T's and fills these T's. And if you understand what I'm saying, once it goes down in there, that's a holding point. If you see what I'm saying, it's a good, stout, sturdy holding point. The full length of the gun. So I do it on both sides. It works out perfect. I've built several of them and have never had one of them come loose. So instead of wasting your time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the trigger set, and I'll go ahead and get the trigger set, and then I'll go ahead and set the slide track for the spear, since you know it's just dado in this out, 3/4 of an inch, dado in this out, setting it in epoxy, and then I plane the top of it nice and smooth. So let me go ahead and get that done. It won't take me but a couple minutes, and I'll be right back with you.